Hi, my name is Jesse Bruin. I'm an assistant professor in the economics department here at Brown University, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my paper. It's titled High Profile Acts of Police Violence, Reduced Civilian Cooperation and Engagement with Law Enforcement. This is joint work with my co-authors, Desmond Dong, who's at the Harvard Kennedy School, Panka Bunchik, who's an incoming assistant professor at Vanderbilt, and Laura Duranicourt, who's in the Princeton economics department. So this paper is really motivated by the high profile and recent spate of police killings of unarmed black individuals in the United States that I think we've all observed over the last sort of 10 years or so. And I think more broadly, use of force has become sort of a routine part of the American law enforcement system. So for example, there's been about 1,000 police killings in an average year over this period. 5% of all gun-related homicides involve an officer pulling the trigger. 50% of the victims of these homicides are racial minorities, 40% of them have no gun. And accountability for these police killings of unarmed black individuals is rare. So of the 15,000 police killings that have occurred since 2005, only about 140 officers have even been arrested and only 50 have been convicted. And there's sort of this growing body of evidence that these events have significant social spillovers, whether it's institutional distrust, legal cynicism and estrangement, urban unrest. There's been other work showing reduced educational attainment among kids who are exposed to these incidents and increased voter engagement. It begs the question, how do these acts of police violence affect perceptions of police in the local community and the way that urban inner city communities interact with law enforcement? If you imagine that these events cause a decline in trust in the communities that experience them, that could in turn have the perverse effect of lowering people's willingness to report crime, which may in turn lead to higher persistent levels of ambient crime and violence. Okay, so what do we do to try to make progress on this question, to understand how these high-profile acts of police violence are affecting the way people behave and interact with law enforcement in their communities? Well, it turns out to be quite a complicated question to answer empirically. One natural way you might think to measure the way individuals interact with law enforcement is via their tendency to pick up the phone and report a crime. So there's some existing work out there that's kind of looked at how 911 calls evolve in the wake of police shootings, but this kind of has a catch-22 to it, which is that police shootings may affect things other than individuals' willingness to report. If a police shooting also raises the total amount of crime or lowers the total amount of crime, that's going to affect the number of 911 calls emerging from a community through a mechanism that has nothing to do with whether or not individuals in that community have changed their willingness to report. Okay, so the fundamental problem here is that the kind of standard reporting measure, these 911 calls, is affected both by the underlying rate of crime and the willingness of the community to report. So how are we going to break through this? Well, kind of the ideal thing you would like to do is you would like to know kind of what are the ambient underlying crime levels in the community, and you would like to benchmark 911 call volume to that ambient crime level. So how do we actually measure like this ground truth amount of crime? Well, we collected data from 8 major U.S. cities that use what's called acoustic gunshot detection technology. So this is a system of fixed array microphones used as a tool by law enforcement that listens for noises that sound like gunshots and then uses the trajectory of the sound waves to triangulate their location. Okay, so by collecting this data on these acoustically detected gunshots, we can actually get a measure of on-the-ground crime that is functionally generated by robots. So humans play no part in whether or not these gunshots get reported. So what do we do with that data? Well, we take that, we pair it with 911 call volume for these same major U.S. cities, and we look for evidence of changes in crime reporting in the aftermath of high-profile acts of police violence. And what we found, frankly, kind of stunned us. In the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, we find that gunshot reporting declines by something like 50% in the days and weeks following the murder across these 8 major U.S. cities. That change persists all the way through the end of 2020. And we find no evidence, for example, that the conviction of Floyd's murderer in 2021 did anything to revert these negative trends back to where they were. So we take this as pretty compelling evidence that high-profile acts of police violence, at least at the scale of the George Floyd murder, do cause real damage to the way people perceive and interact with law enforcement. So thank you very much for listening. That's just a little bit about this project. There's a lot more in the paper, and I would encourage you to go take a look.